So, Star Wars this week, isn't it? So, yeah, the last installment of the saga, the Skywalker saga, which we all know isn't going to be the last Star Wars film, but that's how they're marketing it. And my ticket is booked for, I'm sadly working on Thursday, so I can't really do the midnight showing tomorrow. But I do have a ticket booked for Thursday afternoon after I finish work. So I'll be going to watch Rise of Skywalker on Thursday. But I just thought I'd share some kind of ponderings that I had on the Star Wars saga, because I'm not quite sure how I feel about the Star Wars films. Not anymore, at least. Now, my first memories of seeing the Star Wars films came, I'd say, around about 5 or 6-ish. Now, I grew up in Sunderland, and we have family, or we had family. We still do, but I'm talking in the past tense as if I was still that age. Anyway, we had family down where I live now in Manchester. So every so often we would, when it was school holidays and that kind of stuff, we'd all jump in the car and we'd come down to visit said family. And my kind of first memories of watching Star Wars films was from VHS. I remember seeing Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi round at my cousin's, and he had a load of toys, and then off the back of that I got a load of toys one Christmas, and typical kind of thing. But I never, or at least I don't recall, seeing the first Star Wars film, Episode 4, A New Hope, until the re-release in the cinemas when they did the special editions in, was it 97? I think so. And then after the theatrical release of the special editions, you got the special edition VHSs, if you remember those. They came in, it was a Darth Vader head, so it was a box with the 3 video VHSs in there, and it was like the profile of Darth Vader, or like half of his helmet, and you could either get the gold box set or the silver box set. And the difference between those is one was widescreen and the other was pan and scan 4:3. I can't remember which one was which. I think the silver one was the pan and scan, because I had the gold one and I'm pretty sure that was the widescreen one. I can't remember. Someone remind me. But yeah, so it was a staggered release. They didn't release all 3, so they remastered it, and then they made some alterations and changes, and CGI was kind of the big thing there, so they put in some CGI with the Jabba the Hutt and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I remember coming out of seeing, and by this point, bear in mind, 97, so I would have been 16, and I went and watched the first Star Wars, Episode 4, A New Hope, Special Edition, with the bells and whistles, and this is how George Lucas wants the film to be seen. Hey, oh, if only we knew then what we know now. I went and watched it, and when I came out of the cinema, having watched it, I felt really kind of deflated and let down. I was kind of like, I was aware, obviously I'm 16, at this point I'm going from high school into college, and one of the subjects that I was doing was media studies at college, where, you know, film was a big part of the curriculum. wasn't really a curriculum, but the module, I suppose you could call it. And I was already interested in film by the time I was 16. You know, I was a kind of like, you know, blossoming movie buff. So I was aware of, obviously, the cultural impact that Star Wars had all the way back in 1977, which is 4 years before I was born. And I was obviously vaguely kind of like familiar with Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi through the VHS. I don't know if there were bootlegs. My uncle was a bit of a Del boy, and he always seemed to have. I remember he had a bootleg copy of Jurassic Park. So I remember watching a really kind of grainy version of Jurassic Park, and the opening sequence with the Velociraptor in the cage, you couldn't really make out what was happening in that, and it did the scan line went up, so they didn't really bypass the piracy protection properly because the vertical sync was out of whack on that. But I don't remember them being bad copies on VHS when I watched them round at my cousin's, so they must have been legit copies of very good bootlegs. By the by, I was familiar with them, but I didn't really have the kind of emotional investment or attachment to Star Wars that many people evidently have who saw those films in the cinema. See, for me, my kind of like first latch point from watching a film at the cinema was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That's the first kind of memory. I'm sure it probably wasn't the first film that I watched at the cinema. I remember going with my friend and his mum and dad. They took us to the Metro Centre to watch a load of films there. So I remember seeing things like Vice Versa with Fred Savage and all those kind of like, you know, things. So without IMDb in it now, I don't know what years they came. I'm pretty sure Last Crusade was like 89 or something like that, 88, 89. Anyway, Star Wars. So I came out of watching Star Wars, the first movie, remastered, bells and whistles, a really kind of horrible CGI, Jabba the Hutt, and blah, 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 blah. And I felt kind of like, is that it? All that fuss over, you know, that? I don't really get it. I don't get it. I mean, it was alright, but it's a very, like, I still feel this way now. I think the first Star Wars film is very middle of the road for me. And I find it different. Whenever I'm watching a film that is obviously older than me, I try to put myself in the mindset of what would it have been like seeing this film for the first time. And I just couldn't really do it with, I mean, granted, I was only 16, and I find it easier to do that nowadays and appreciate the film as kind of, as it is kind of thing, as a piece of art of that period. It is easier to do now, but for Star Wars, for some reason, and maybe it's because it was a special effects film, and I found it jarring, even back then, I found it jarring going from the practical model work that was happening, like the original, because they kept some of the original shots, which, you know, they deemed were up to par for 1997 standard, and then they replaced others. And I found it really jarring going from the practical effects that they kept to the CGI effect. And to be fair, some of the CGI that they put in the special editions is better than others. However, some of it, even for back then, wasn't great at all. And the whole kind of, you know, there was lightsabers that didn't really, you know, they weren't rotoscoped in properly, and, you know, the effects on them didn't, even though they'd kind of like tweaked the effects, they still let some of the less kind of polished effects slip through the net and didn't really do anything with them. And all this kind of thing. And it's like, even if you go and watch the Blu-ray versions of Return of the Jedi to this day, even with all the tinkering with like the new that they've put in and all that kind of stuff, they still have not put in the shadow after Luke, spoilers, defeats Vader, chops his hand off, and he's stood over him, holding the lightsaber over him. When they were actually shooting that, as Mark Hamill kind of lifted the sword back over his head, the actual blade, or the kind of like the tube that they had in the lightsabers, actually spun out of the hilt. So he was left holding literally just the handle. And there's a shot in there as he stood over Darth Vader where you can see the shadow cast and Mark Hamill, and you can see the shadow of the hilt of the lightsaber, but there's no shadow from the shaft of the actual blade of the lightsaber, where there should be. And they probably didn't do that because they're like, well, a light wouldn't cast a shadow, but it looks wrong. It just looks wrong. You know, if that hadn't been kind of like a failing of the prop, and he was, you know, and it didn't fly out of the handle, then it still would have been in there. But because of that blooper, it's not, and they never went in and fixed it. That was a massive tangent. I forgot my original point. Yes, I came out of the original Star Wars really kind of like underwhelmed, and like, I don't really get it. And then the special edition, because as I say, it was a staggered release, the special edition for Empire Strikes Back came out, and I really enjoyed it. Because when, like I say, I was only about maybe 6, 7, 8 tops when we watched the VHSs, and this is, you know, 8 years later. I hadn't revisited the Star Wars films. So I was literally kind of, in a way, seeing them for the first time, even though I was aware of Empire and Return of the Jedi and the Ewoks and all that kind of stuff through those video copies. I was a kid. So, you know, effectively I was watching them for the first time. And then Empire came out, and then like the revelation came out that Darth Vader was Luke's dad, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then the ending, which was a downbeat ending. The Empire won that chapter of the story, and that's even kind of like being remotely aware of how that film turned out. It was still a gut punch, you know. It worked on that kind of thematic level, and I was like, oof, okay, the bad guys won. Now, being 16, I couldn't really think of another example of a film where the bad guys win. What the fuck? So it really kind of worked and resonated with me. So I was like, okay, this is much better. I enjoyed this one a lot more. And then Return of the Jedi came out, and, you know, I thought this is actually a decent conclusion to the trilogy. I'm down with this. I actually prefer Return of the Jedi. Controversial opinion coming up here, but I prefer Return of the Jedi over Star Wars. I think it works a lot better with Empire than what Empire does with Star Wars. I mean, obviously Empire builds upon Star Wars, but Star Wars felt like very much like a standalone effort of a film. You know, it tells its story from start to finish, and, you know, aside from a few loose threads, it doesn't feel like it was actually leading into Empire Strikes Back. Return of the Jedi feels like it's concluding the story that was set up in Empire Strikes Back, rather than the story that was actually set up in Star Wars. Now, agree to disagree on this, but like I say, I think, you know, those two films work a lot better than, you know, what they do working with the original Star Wars. That's just how I feel. And yeah. So the special editions come out in theatres. I pick them up on VHS and I watch them a few more times, and I become more familiar with them. And then 2 years later we get The Phantom Menace. Episode 1. The prequels start. that was how they kind of like, led up to, in the marketing at least, that's how they were kind of like leading up to the launch of the prequels, by re-releasing the original films to get those films, which were at that point 15-20 years old, back into public consciousness. We'll jazz them up a little bit, we'll put some newfangled CGI in there, and we'll get these films back in the public consciousness, ready to deliver the prequels a couple of years later. So The Phantom Menace comes out. I go and watch it. And by this point, 1999, I'm 18. Oh, I'm turning 18, because I think they came out in May and my birthday's in June. And it's an enjoyable kind of kids film. It's got its problems, namely Jar Jar Binks. That's a big problem. The opening kind of like setup and all of the political stuff feels really kind of out of place in what is essentially a kids film that's designed to sell toys. And let's face it, this film is designed to sell toys, because that's where Lucas's bread and butter is. He gets all of the merchandise money. So of course he's going to have new ships, and he's going to have new characters, and he's going to have CGI characters, and you're going to have little rubber characters that fly, and blah de blah de blah. The one saving grace of this film is, well, there's two. Arguably, there's two. The pod race sequence is actually really well done. Really well done. It's a race sequence, very much like the chariot sequence in Ben-Hur, which I believe it took a healthy dose of inspiration from. But for me, the standout sequence of that film is the Duel of the Fates. Anything to do with the lightsabers. The three-way lightsaber sequence with Darth Maul, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Qui-Gon Jinn is actually, still to this day for me, is probably the best lightsaber sequence in the entire saga, without question. And the Duel of the Fates, the score by John Williams, is just superb. And I went back to watch it quite a few times. I'd say 4 times maybe, purely off the strength of, holy shit, this lightsaber duel is actually fucking really good. So I was quite happy to go and watch the film on multiple passes just to get to that point, because I hadn't seen a lightsaber duel with just as much kind of energy and enthusiasm as what we'd seen in The Phantom Menace. So I was all over that. But the film itself is rather, like I say, it's kind of forgettable. You want to forget it, certainly for Jar Jar Binks if you were over a certain age, but I believe he played really well for kids. And, Star Wars is all about entertaining kids. So, Attack of the Clones comes out. And I'm working at the cinema at this point. And I don't really like Attack of the Clones. It's really kind of like, looking back on it now especially, it's really kind of, its reach exceeds its grasp, I think is the phrase with that. It feels too artificial. It doesn't feel like a Star Wars film. There's too much CGI in it, and there's too much bad CGI. I don't think the technology was quite there for what they were actually trying to do. You've got the bobblehead effect with all the clones, putting Tamora Morrison's head on all of the clone troopers, because believe it or not, although watching it now it's very obvious, but not one piece of Stormtrooper armor was created for that film. all of the bodies of the stormtroopers are all created in the computer, and it doesn't even look like they were actually motion captured. I don't know if the technology was around back then. It looks like it was hand animated, because there's some very wonky kind of animation going on with the bodies. The Kaminoan scene where Obi-Wan fights Boba Fett, all of the water, because it's a water planet, all of that kind of looks really ropey. You know, it's all shot on green screen, and you know, it doesn't look real, and because it doesn't look real, it takes me out of it. I mean, there's some really kind of like poorly pulled focus shots in the film. The whole Colosseum sequence looks horrific. And then they brought in a digital Yoda, because the technology was, you know, up to snuff. They thought they'd take the puppet out that they had in the Phantom Menace, and they'd put a digital Yoda in there. And you go back and you look at it, and it just doesn't look right. And then he starts flipping around like a frog, and I was kind of like, holy shit, Yoda's in a fucking lightsaber battle with Christopher Lee, Count Dracula. Holy shit. And that was kind of like, oh wow, that was like the set piece where I remember, you know, sneaking into the back of a few films to watch that scene over and over again. As I was working at the cinema, I could do that. I knew the times where the film was roughly due to come out, so I could go in and watch it, and people would kind of enjoy that scene. But you could see up until that point, if I would go in and watch, you know, in a packed screen, I could see people getting kind of fidgety. Maybe that was just me reading the audience wrong, but people looked like they were fidgeting around, because it was quite a long film, especially for back then. And, you know, again, there's really kind of like awful dialogue in there. Some lines are really poorly delivered, especially by Hayden Christensen. But Natalie Portman's not doing herself any favours. Ewan McGregor looked bored and pissed off, and I believe he's actually come out and said that he really didn't enjoy shooting that film because it was all green screen work, so he was acting against fucking tennis balls and stuff like that, which must have been really kind of stressful. And yeah, I think now looking back on it, it's probably the worst out of all of them, I would say. Maybe that's a controversial take considering the hatred for The Last Jedi, but that's just how it was. And then by the time Revenge of the Sith came round, I believe I'd left the cinema, but I was still privy to a few staff showings, so went and watched the staff showing at the Gold Class over at the Lowry with another lad who was still working at the cinema at the time. Went around, picked some up, got a staff showing on, it's in the morning, let's get over there before you get to work, and blah 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 blah. Went and watched it, and it was alright. Still some of the flaws that were left over from the other two prequels. The writing was still fucking terrible. The delivery and the kind of like what was supposed to be kind of big emotional dramatic scenes came over as kind of more melodrama, and just kind of like wasn't really hitting the highs that they really were kind of aiming for there. Again, it felt a little bit overlong, and the kind of the hand wringing, trying to get the really kind of high emotional beats of this guy who we've seen grow from a child to be a petulant teenager to be a petulant adult, turn to the dark side. You know, it's not really any surprise coming there, and I feel like, yeah, I feel like George knew how he wanted to get to. Well, he knew where he wanted to get to, but he didn't know how to get there. And the route that he chose just didn't really make any fucking sense whatsoever, and doesn't perfectly fit with what he started in, you know, the original trilogy. There's some, like, you know, Leia remembers her mum. Her mum dies literally 30 seconds after she comes out of the womb. So honestly, don't know how, you know, an infant, especially a newborn infant, is going to remember her mum. She was really beautiful. You didn't get to see her because you were covered in goop, and the Uber robots were taking you away to rub all of the, you know, amniotic fluid off you before your mum died of a broken heart, of all things. The climactic lightsaber battle, I feel, didn't live up to the Duel of the Fates that was in the first film. they tried to make it epic, but it just felt a little bit overly choreographed and not quite real. There was a little bit too much kind of like spinny and not enough kind of clashing of the lightsabers, and it didn't really help that both of the, you know, Obi-Wan and Anakin both had a blue lightsaber. They really should have had different color lightsabers. Really speaking, Anakin's turned to the dark side there, so he should have a red lightsaber, let's be honest about it, but you know, it's one of those things. The CGI again is better than what we got in both Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, but it's just, there's still that sense of artificiality to it because it's all shot on fucking green screen again. And granted, some of the sets are a little bit more kind of like robust and a little bit more to work with for the actors this time around, but it's still, you know, 90% of it is still green screen, and you know, it just, it doesn't lend a sense of realism to the world in the way that, you know, J.J. Abrams brought back in the Force Awakens. A lot of, you know, what you see in there is actually real locations and all this kind of stuff. They're not, you know, shooting everything on a soundstage or a green screen. But you know, it introduces Darth Vader. Didn't really buy, you know, his anger or his turning or anything like that, especially once the helmet goes on. So I mean, that sequence, fair enough, is actually well put together. And you know, after Obi-Wan defeats him, the you know, Ewan McGregor imparts a sense of emotion into his little speech. You know, you were my brother, Anakin, all that kind of stuff. That's fairly well done. And then, you know, when you see Vader getting put together, that's well done. The moment the mask goes on and that first breath is taken, that should have been where they ended that film for me. You know, didn't really need to see Luke or Leia, you know, be born and Natalie Portman die, and all this. She's just dying of a broken heart. Like I say, it just doesn't. It ends. He tried to tie that film up and bookend it, going into, you know, have all the pieces laid on the chessboard, ready for it going into Episode 4, and he didn't really need to do that. So, you know, like I say, it's definitely better than Attack of the Clones. Is it better than Phantom Menace? Yeah, probably. But the climax, the big lightsaber moment, which should have been the lightsaber fight to end all lightsaber fights between Obi-Wan and Anakin, just didn't really play for me like as well as what the Duel of the Fates did, which is a shame. But yeah, I mean, then we get to the new trilogy. I really liked Force Awakens. I know it was just kind of essentially a rehash of Star Wars, which I said was just a kind of a middling film, but the play on nostalgia and the kind of connection that I have to like Harrison Ford now, like 40 years on, you know, kind of gave it a bit more of an emotional heft, especially when, you know, they boot Han off, and it was nice to see Carrie Fisher back. It was nice to see, you know, it would have been nice to see Mark Hamill. It was nice to see Mark Hamill back as Luke Skywalker, although very briefly. But what it did was it brought in characters and made you actually care about these characters in a way that the prequels never really did. Their kind of like relationships and how they kind of bond and become friends felt much more real than what anything in the prequels actually felt. You know, you actually get to know and like these characters a lot quicker and become invested in them much more deeply than what you did with, you know, any of the characters in the prequels. Obi-Wan, Anakin, you know, Qui-Gon, Yoda, all that kind of stuff, Mace Windu. So that was actually really well done, and you know, obviously the special effects have got to a point where they are literally cream of the crop. So, and from an action point of view, I thought it was really well handled. There was a minimal amount of kind of like J.J. Abrams lens flare and shaky cam and all that kind of stuff. So I really enjoyed The Force Awakens. And then The Last Jedi rolls around, and aside from that whole Canto Bight sequence and Rose Tico, I think she is probably the most feckless character in the Star Wars saga, after Jar Jar Binks. I think she was really kind of like misjudged and kind of I feel bad for the actress. I can't remember her. Kelly Tran, is it? I feel bad for her because of all the shit that came her way after that. Wasn't really her fault. It was the fault of the script and, you know, the writing of her character. You take out that Canto bike sequence and all this kind of got to free the animals and the whole vegan message that's in there and all this, you know, cruelty to animals bullshit and blah 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 blah. And you chop out Rose Tico, who all of a sudden kisses Finn for no fucking reason at the end of the film, saves his life, and you just, you know, Finn's sacrifice at the end of that film would have made the world of difference. It would have ended the film on the bad note that Empire Strikes Back ended on. It would have ended on that kind of emotional note. It's like, holy shit, we've just been kicked in the balls, the bad guys. Although the good guys would have won through Finn's sacrifice, or would they? Who knows? If he'd actually ran that kind of ship into the cannon, who knows? Would it have stopped it? Probably not. That would have given more weight to the fact that he was willing to sacrifice himself. That would have kind of like, that's where I thought his character was going to go. How wrong I was. But yeah, I actually thought, aside from her character and the Canto bike sequence, I thought, okay, you're being subversive here for subversive sake, but I'm going to go along, I'm going to forgive some of the misgivings of the film because I want to be kind of like led down a different path every now and then. I want to be surprised, even if I don't agree with the direction of the film or where you're actually taking your job as a writer and director is to tell the story that you want to tell, and my job as an audience member is either to get on board or not. And you know, for the majority of the film I was actually on board with it. I didn't agree with it, but I was like, okay, I know there's another film to come, so let's see where this is actually going to finish. I didn't really, but like I say, it's because I'm not a diehard, stick in the mud Star Wars fan. I was alright with some of the changes to what people perceived as, being the behaviours of certain characters. Luke would never, he fucking would, because the film explains he had an internal moral dilemma when it came to killing his nephew. And he didn't go through with it ultimately, but through the performance of Mark Hamill in that scene where he's got the lightsaber and he lights it up over Kylo's head, you can see the internal conflict within him. That's down to the acting, I thought it was very clear. Luke was going to do something that he really didn't want to do, and in the end he didn't have the will to actually do it. And the film was not shy in showing the conflict there. And through all of that, that's why Luke became a recluse. He was disappointed in himself. And it made him more human as a result. Yeah, he was the hero of the first three films, but it doesn't mean that he's the perfect person and makes the right decision moving forward. Just because in your mind, in your extended universe that you have in your mind, that's how you want Luke to behave, doesn't mean he will do. So I didn't really have massive issues with that kind of stuff. The film was telling a story, it was going in a direction that I wouldn't have taken it in, but that doesn't mean that it's the wrong direction. We've got another film, let's see where these characters end up. So yeah, I mean, I'll find out in 2 days if the saga finishes in a satisfactory way, something that actually makes sense to me and I'm not disappointed with. But at the end of the day, you get out of the film what you bring to it. So if you're going to be going into the film thinking, oh, fucking Last Jedi was shit, this one's going to be just as shit, guess what, you're going to come away disappointed. But if you go in there and take as little with you, it's like the scene where, like, Empire Strikes Back, where Yoda says to Luke, when he's going into the cave, and Luke's like, what's in there? Yoda says, only what you take with you. If you're taking that negative energy in there with you to watch this last film, that's gonna colour your entire kind of perception of the film, and you may not actually get a pleasing entertaining or satisfactory kind of result at the end of that. So I would say go in there with the best of intentions when you go and watch Rise of Skywalker, and I think you might actually be surprised at what you get out of it. So yeah, but again, I'm not a diehard stick in the mud fan, as I've explained. So I hope it's good, and I hope it actually, pleases plenty of people, because God knows they've put their energy, time and effort and certainly money into the franchise, so they deserve to get something out of it. Will it be as kind of like crowd pleasingly, rousing as Endgame? Probably not, but what is? But we'll have to wait and see. So yeah, Star Wars. I'll be seeing it on Thursday. I hope I enjoy it. I hope you guys enjoy it. And yeah, let me know what you think after you've seen it. But for now, I'm going to go in, see to the dog, and go to bed probably, because I'm a little bit tired. So yeah, thanks for watching the video, guys, and I'll catch you probably after Thursday, after I've seen Star Wars. So take care, guys. Bye.